Good morning, everybody. It's not that difficult to become a world-renowned expert in snails and slugs. There are not that many people who are mad enough to work on them, to be honest. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Cheryl, to Jim, and to Dave for inviting me. So over the next 20 or so minutes, I'm going to follow on really from what Robin was saying, but I'm going to focus on our specific situation here in California. Over the past 10 or so years, us at UC Riverside, we've done quite a lot of research on pet snails and pet slugs. So we've done everything from the first thorough surveys of the state to, I guess, kind of novel research on control strategies. And today, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the discoveries that we've made. One thing I'm nearly always asked at conferences like this is, Rory, how in the name of God did you get interested in working on snails and slugs? And it's a very, very good question. I became fascinated with snails and slugs when I was a young kid growing up back in Ireland. I'm Irish, not American. And I remember very distinctly reading in a natural history book that snails and slugs could crawl with ease over broken glass and that they had teeth sharper than those of a shark. So when you're young and you already have an interest in natural history, when you hear these sorts of facts, it's really enough to push you over the edge. And I became totally fascinated with them. Today, their repulsive nature, as Robin said, has kind of made them something of a celebrity. And there have been lots of movies. This one called Slither is fantastic. And even novels which have had slugs and slug-like creatures, I guess, as their main characters. Interestingly, for slugs as well, they've actually given rise to a number of phobias. And a quick search in the American Journal of Clinical Hypnosis showed that there have actually been lots and lots of cases where patients have needed prolonged exposure to hypnotherapy to actually overcome their fear of these organisms. But really, on a more serious scientific note, as Robin said, slugs and snails are among the most significant pests of production systems, not just here in California, not just in North America, but really on a global scale. Gastropods are really pests on a number of different levels. Firstly, they're direct pests of agriculture and horticulture, and this is really how we know them. Most of the plants that we grow for food are actually eaten by slugs and snails as well. So everything from carrots to lettuce, these are photos I've taken over the years. So as you all know, we're in a constant kind of battle or a war with these organisms, and it's one that we're really struggling to win. Robin also said this, slugs and snails are also important vectors of plant diseases, and things like carrot licorice rot and brassica dark-leaf spot are particularly damaging. But what I found surprising is that they're also capable of transmitting human pathogens as well, such as E. coli. I don't know whether you guys can remember, in 2007, I was also here in California, and there was really lots of publicity over recalls of fecally contaminated spinach and fecally contaminated salad crops. Well, slugs are thought to have been partially responsible, would you believe, for these recalls, because they were essentially the vehicles scientists think for transmitting the E. coli from one plant to another. And of course, what was mentioned earlier, slugs and snails are also contaminatory pests as well. So in California then, we've got a total of 279 snail and slug species. Of them, 242 are native, and of course the best researched and the most well-known are our banana slugs. Now, banana slugs are found from the south of the state. Not many people know that you can actually find banana slugs in Mount Palomar. A number of years ago, scientists in Santa Cruz found some banana slugs in the forests in Mount Palomar. They reckon it's a new species, and they haven't described it yet. But essentially, they're found from Mount Palomar all the way up the west coast of the United States, right up to Alaska. And again, this is something Robin said. Native species tend to feed on decomposing plant matter, on lichens, and on fungi, and they're generally not regarded as very serious pests. That title, surprise, surprise, is reserved almost exclusively for the invasive fauna. And here in California, we have 37 invasive slugs and snails, and the vast majority of them are like myself, they've come from Europe. Now, I don't have time, obviously, to go through 37 species of slugs and snails with you. What I would like to do instead is talk to you about some of the more interesting species that we've come across. The only slug species that we found during the surveys of California that is not from Europe is this guy here. It's called Valencia Cubensis, and as its name suggests, you've probably guessed it, it's thought to be native to Cuba. The Cuban slug has also invaded many islands in the South Pacific and throughout the Caribbean, and it's an extremely serious pest of an enormous range of crops. I mean, everything from coffee through to cassava, through to citrus. Valencia cubensis as well is important because it's able to transmit that nematode that Robin was talking about. And the nematode is called Angiostrongylus Cantonensis. The name isn't too important, but what is important is that it's potentially lethal in humans. And there have been recorded fatalities throughout the South Pacific, in Hawaii, in Jamaica, and even in Australia as well. In California, we collected the first specimens of this slug in Santa Barbara in 2006. Now, there haven't been any additional records since then, but I would urge you all to keep your eyes peeled for it, because if this slug does get established in California, it's going to be a major, major, major problem. It's quite easy to identify it. Most slugs, as Robin said, have this saddle-shaped structure at the front. That's called a mantle. But in Valencia cubensis and in other veronicelid slugs, that structure covers the entire body. So it's quite distinctive. If you do find a slug like this on your property, we will be very, very interested in taking a look at it. The most abundant slug that we found throughout the state was the Valencia slug, and this guy is native to the Iberian Peninsula. Again, we found it absolutely everywhere, from Imperial County in the south right up to Del Norte County on the Oregon border. It was most common in greenhouses and in nurseries, and it's a known pest of orchids, but also lots of other ornamental plant species as well. Again, it's relatively easy to identify it. This is a good photograph of it because you can see the two distinct tram-line stripes running the full length of the body. The mucus is very, very watery, so when you have it in your hand and if you roll it back and forth, it literally just glides back and forth on very, very watery mucus. It's not that sticky. And this species likes to aggregate in quite large clusters as well under potted plants. The hole on the front, that's actually mechanical damage, and you can see the white structure in underneath that small little hole here. I'll just point it out to you guys. So just here, that's actually the shell inside the mantle. So slugs do actually have shells, but they're actually inside the mantle. One of my favorite slugs, and definitely an oddity here in California, this is called Testicella haliotidia, and it's one of the very, very few slugs that actually has an external shell. This slug doesn't spend a lot of time on the ground surface. It definitely prefers to be underground. So I guess, and I'm pretty sure for that reason, its distribution throughout North America is very, very much under-recorded. It's also a carnivore. It feeds predominantly on earthworms, and because it doesn't feed on plant material, it's generally not regarded as a pest species. But we really don't know the impact of this slug on beneficial earthworm populations. Duroceras reticulatum, the great garden slug, or the milky slug as it's known, is the most widespread slug on our planet without question. It's found throughout the world, and it was the second most abundant slug that we found in California. It's got a huge ecological range. It's found absolutely everywhere, and it's a very, very serious pest of ornamentals, of fruit, of vegetables, of cereals, and even of pasture as well. If you own a small garden, if you grow crops, if you've got a garden centre or a nursery, you will definitely have had this slug on your property at some stage. An easy way to identify it is when it's continuously disturbed. So if you pick it up in your fingers or if you poke it with something, its mucus becomes very, very milky. I don't know whether you can make it out on that picture there, but it's not an excellent example, but the mucus does become very, very obviously milky coloured. The last slug that I want to mention is the dusky slug, and this is one of the species that we've done some genetics research on because we were very interested in trying to figure out where the Californian populations originated from. And our results have told us that they originated from Western Europe, most likely Belgium, but the species then stopped off in the northeastern United States on its way here to California. That's one of the great things about genetics research. It can answer really, really nice questions and give you some very, very useful information. Another interesting thing about this slug is that we were pretty certain that it was only found north of San Mateo County in California. But a couple of weeks ago, I actually found some specimens in a garden center in Riverside. So it's another one I'd like you to keep your eyes peeled for. It's quite a large slug. It's about 7 centimeters in length. It's brown yellow color. Its mucus is bright yellow as well. And the foot fringe has got very distinct black vertical lines on it. That's a good characteristic for the species. For those of you daft enough to want to learn more about the slugs of California, Dave has kindly included a copy of my slug identification guide with your information pack. Also, if you have any slug or snail related queries, please do feel free to get in touch with me, and I'm sure Robin also feels the same. We love to hear from people. I'm guessing that most of you probably are more familiar with pest snails than pest slugs. But I'd still like to talk to you about some of the species that are here in California. These guys, Robin has already mentioned them, are called amber snails. They're semi-aquatic, so in Southern California and in Northern California, we tend to find them in the wetter parts of nurseries, generally around fountains. I'm not going to say much more about them. These are one of Robin's specialities, and she's going to talk to you in more detail about them in an hour or so. Anyone who lives in North San Diego County probably recognizes this critter. It's the white snail, and its native range is the Mediterranean basin. The first specimens actually of this snail in the whole of North America were actually found in La Jolla here in San Diego almost 100 years ago. It's a very, very distinctive species in areas where it's established because, as you can see from the photo, it forms very large aggregations, usually on fence posts. The photo there is one that I took when I was in South Australia, and it gives you a really good idea of the size of the potential clusters of these snails in the environment. And in Australia, this snail is a major pest of cereal crops. Another one you probably recognize, this is the Decklid snail. And as Robin said, this is an omnivorous species, so it feeds on plant tissue, but also on animal tissue as well. And it's famous in California because it's a biological control agent for the brown garden snail. We're concerned with this species because it doesn't feed only on the brown garden snail. So if it's washed or if it's moved into a new area, it could have potentially adverse effects on native slug and snail species. If you want to use it as a biocontrol agent, you can only do so in certain counties in the southern half of the state. But a month ago, I was surveying up around Sacramento, and I came across some specimens of this species outside a rail yard. So I suspect it's probably been inadvertently moved around. And lastly, the most famous snail in California, the brown garden snail. This snail is probably the best researched snail in the world. Again, if you grow any crops, if you've got a small garden, this is a snail you'll recognize. If you own a citrus orchard, this snail will feed on ripening fruit, on ripe fruit, leaves, and even the bark of young trees. One of the nice things about this slug, well, not particularly nice, but it's interesting, is that it can lay its eggs throughout the year if conditions are right. And the eggs themselves are usually laid in the soil in a primitive nest about 2 inches deep. And when the eggs hatch into small little juvenile snails, those snails also remain in the soil as well for up to 5 days. So it makes them very, very difficult to detect. So that got us thinking at UC Riverside, and we wondered, would it be possible to develop a drench treatment to target these juveniles and these eggs? Ideally, we wanted to use something that was natural, and essential oils immediately sprung to mind. Although essential oils have been used to control other pests such as weevils and aphids, their potential against pest snails and slugs really hasn't been given a lot of attention. So in collaboration with the USDA in Hawaii, we decided we'd try and fill this gap, and we looked at the efficacy of 11 essential oils against the eggs and juveniles of the brown garden snail. The oils you can see there on the slide, we used everything from bitter orange to eucalyptus to pine to spearmint. And most of the oils smelled really, really, really good, but garlic smelled absolutely dreadful. It was extremely overpowering. You may ask, well, why did we include it? Well, as Robin mentioned in her talk, it was one of the oils that did show some preliminary success in preliminary trials. But really, I don't think it had a long-term future because it was extremely overpowering. So then, to test these oils, we used 2 steps. Firstly, we placed the eggs and the juvenile snails separately on filter paper that was soaked with one of the oils and at various concentrations. And this allowed us to calculate what we call an LC50 value. Now, this value is essentially the concentration that kills half of our sample. And we were able then to use this value to compare our various oils. So it told us which oils were most toxic and which were least toxic. Unfortunately, I cannot give you actual data, actual specific values, because this research is not published yet, and we've had a lot of interest from industry as well. But what I will do is I will show you the list of the most effective oils that we found. Clove bud was by far and away the most effective oil that we tested in our suite. It was 3 times more toxic than pine oil and 5 times more toxic than peppermint oil. So at this stage, we knew that clove bud oil was very, very toxic to our snails and to our juvenile snails and to our eggs. And while this was an important result, if this lethal concentration was also lethal to the plants that we were trying to protect, well, then the result was pretty meaningless, to be honest. So for step 2, we decided to bury eggs and to bury juveniles in muslin bags in potted hostas, and then we drenched the soil with one of 3 solutions. The first solution was a 5% clove oil solution. We knew this would be toxic to the plant, so it was essentially our positive control. Then we had our test solutions, and these solutions were the minimum concentration of clove oil that caused 100% mortality in our eggs and juveniles. And then lastly, we had a water treatment, which was essentially our negative control. So what did we find? Well, this is a leaf from our positive control, which was our 5% clove oil solution. You can see there's very, very obvious damage. This leaf is from our negative control. There's no damage at all. And our test solutions, the leaves were practically identical to those in our negative control. So, sorry, I beg your pardon. So at this stage, we knew that the oils were toxic, and we knew that they were safe to use. They weren't causing phytotoxicity. As I said, we did bury eggs and juveniles in muslin bags, and you can see all of the juveniles had literally died. The juveniles in the positive control pots and in the test solution pots. They had literally melted. You can see the anterior end of the snail had literally collapsed. It was more difficult trying to figure out what was going on with the eggs, because from the outside the eggs looked to be perfectly okay. So we decided to put the eggs on damp filter paper, and after 30 days only the eggs in the water treatment had hatched. So those in the positive control and those with our test solution had died. So the clove oil had obviously killed them. So at the end, we were pretty confident in saying that drenches of clove oil could be lethal to the eggs and the juveniles of the brown garden snail without being phytotoxic to our plants. And this is particularly important for clove because it's exempt from pesticide registration and pesticide residue tolerance requirements under federal law. Why is that important? Well, it's important because it means that the time and the cost required will be a lot less in bringing a pesticide containing clove oil to market. So as I said, we've had a good bit of interest from industry, and we're really hoping we can get a commercially available product from clove oil. Another gastropod management technique that we're interested in developing up the road at UCR is biological control. And like the essential oils, this is very much an under-researched area in terms of slugs and snails in North America. And I find that very surprising because slugs and snails have got a very diverse range of natural enemies, and a commercially available biological control agent is currently being used very, very successfully back in Europe. That product is called Nemaslug, and the active agent is a nematode called Phasmarhabditis hermaphrodita. And the nematode is lethal to a huge range of pests, snails, and slugs. Many of the species that I showed you at the beginning of this talk are actually succumb to this nematode. The product itself consists of 12 million effective juvenile nematodes mixed with clay. It's very, very easy to use it. You simply mix the product with water and then apply it to your target area. One of the very nice things about Nemaslug is that it is only lethal to snails and to slugs. And it's very, very, very effective. In the UK, for example, slug damage to winter wheat has been reduced by 89%. And in the Netherlands, orchid damage by gastropods has been reduced consistently by over 95% when Nemaslug has been used. So some of you are probably wondering, where can you get your hands on some of this product? Well, unfortunately you can't, because it's not available here in the United States. The reason why it's not available is because the active agent, Phasmarhabditis, has never ever been found here. There have been lots of attempts to find Phasmarhabditis. 4 or 5 years ago, a company called Becker Underwood, I don't know if there are any representatives here, they were offering $150 for every slug specimen that were sent to them by specialists like myself. And if they found the nematode in a slug that you sent, they gave you a check for $100,000. No one ever found it, unfortunately. Last year, we were lucky enough to get a grant from the California Department of Food and Agriculture to try and develop a similar biological control agent for the nursery industry here in California. At the minute, we're screening hundreds of specimens collected throughout the state. I'm not long back from a collection trip to the north of the state, and we're finding lots and lots and lots of nematodes. Unfortunately, we haven't found Phasmarhabditis yet. We're not overly worried because we reckon there are lots and lots of other nematodes out there that could potentially be commercialized. So please stay tuned. Hopefully, when I speak to you all again, we may have an agent available. And that's all I'm going to say. I just want to thank the Western Region IPM Centre for grant support, CDFA for a biological control grant, and 2 outstanding undergrad students, David Yu and Serena Simmons, who helped me a lot. These guys pick up snails and slugs and everything. They are not afraid at all. So if anybody has any questions and we have time, I'd be very happy to take some. If not, please do tackle me throughout the day. I'm going to be here for the remainder of the day. Thanks very much for your attention.
Questions for Rory? Rory, since eugenol is a known herbicide, did you look at root damage?
We did as well, actually, Dave. Yeah, we looked at, I should have said that when we finished our trials, we took the plants up out of the plot, rinsed them off, and we looked for root damage. We compared our positive controls, our test solutions with our negative controls, and there was no obvious root damage. No. Yeah?
What concentration of clove oil was detected in snails, and did you test residuality?
We didn't test residuality. Concentration, I'm really not allowed to say what was the concentration, because we've had some very strong interest from industry and they've kind of warned us about saying too much. What I will say, it was less than 1%.
Any other questions? All right.
Okay, thank you.